The Phileas Club is entirely supported by its listeners. If you think you'd like to support the show, please go to patreon.com/The Phileas Club and subscribe. The link is in the show notes. Hey everyone, and welcome to the Phileas Club. This is episode 98 for November 2017, and we're talking about what it's like to be a woman. Hello everyone, and welcome to the Phileas Club. My name is Patrick Beja, and this is a show where we get together with different people from different countries, different places in the world, different outlooks, different cultures, and we discuss stuff that has been happening in the past month or so. So those are the regular episodes, which we do towards the end of the month. But also, in the middle of the month, we often do special episodes where we tackle a specific topic, or a specific country, or a specific something. And today we are going to be doing that. We're going to be talking about being a woman. And you might think, well, Patrick, you aren't one, and you're right. But thankfully, I do have a fantastic cast of women that agreed to come on the show and discuss what that means and the less positive things about that, aspect of our society. Before we start, though, I would just like to say, just to ward off any discussion that isn't the topic, that what we're going to be talking about this, it doesn't mean that there aren't other issues for other people, that there aren't issues with men being sexually harassed, that there aren't issues with other categories of people being discriminated against. But just like we do when we talk about, let's say, a communist in France, or an Irishman, or a Venezuelan, or a conservative American, we're here to listen to what the people have to say, because that's something that doesn't happen enough in our society today, I feel. So just listen to what the people have to say and maybe try to understand. And I'm talking to the left, I'm talking to the right, I'm talking to the center here, I'm talking to everyone, because I'm sure that everyone would have something to add to this, but we're just here to listen. So that's me. I'm going to try to speak less during this show, and I'm going to let the women talk to us. And that wonderful laugh you're hearing is that of Alison Sheridan. How are you doing? I was going to say sir. See, my bias already showed. I have too many men on this show. How are you doing, madam? Alison will be better, probably.
I'm excited to be here. I was just laughing because I was giving Patrick a hard time. He said he was going to be quiet during this episode, and I've got my bets going.
You know that's not going to happen. We also have Wendy, who's joining us. So Alison is in California. Wendy is originally from the U.S., from Utah, but she's currently in Sweden, which is the most wonderfully equal country for genders in the world, right?
It is. It is. I mean, we're not perfect, but we're
not
close.
Perfect. Sure. Thanks for joining us, Wendy. We also have Marlene, who's joining us from the Netherlands. How's it going?
Great, thank you.
And finally, a newbie, a newcomer. Although Alison is the first time for you on the show, but you're just so much into podcasting that and I know you so well.
And you've been on my show.
Yeah. But yes, Shay is here as well. How's it going, Shay?
I'm doing well. I am from the totally non-confrontational, super inclusive South of America, state known as Georgia. No problems here. We're all, we accept everybody.
Well, I'm sure this is going to make for an interesting conversation. So thanks to all four of you for being on the show. I think we're going to start by maybe giving each one of you a chance to introduce yourselves, and then, we'll see where the conversations go. I'm sure there are going to be things to discuss. Let's start maybe with Alison. Why don't you go ahead?
So I'm a retired mechanical engineer, IT professional. I worked at a giant corporation for 35 years, 60,000 person company, 11 years as mechanical engineer, and then slid over into the IT field when that was invented, and became an IT fellow, which was the highest technical level an IT person could reach inside our company. Retired now, podcasting for fun, and that's about it.
Yeah. All right. Wendy, what about yourself? This is just to give listeners a little bit of context about who each of you are and what you do, what you like. It doesn't necessarily have to be about your job specifically, but yeah, Wendy.
Yeah, my name is Wendy. I am a acting therapist. That means I just act like one. That was the wrong word. I am a therapist, and I'm currently in Sweden. We've been here almost 3.5 years now, and originally from the States. Don't know where we're going next, but enjoying life overseas a little bit. Are
you not staying in Sweden?
I don't know. We'll have to see. It's winter, as you know. You live in Finland. It's a time where everyone considers their life mission and thinks about going to Spain. So I don't know. We'll have to see.
You look outside and you're like, why did I come here again? I don't, Marlene, what about yourself?
So I'm Marlene. I'm an artist. I work in different applied arts fields, so letterworking, bookbinding, that kind of stuff. I also really like to cook, and I'm currently working on a guest book for a wedding of some friends and a personalized diary book for a girl in the States.
Excellent. All right, and finally, Shay. Tell us where you're from, or, something about yourself.
Of course, a little bit more. So I'm originally from Atlanta, and I work in production. I do master control, but I'm also a producer as well. I have a podcast myself called The Showmance Club. It's more for a television show, so it's not. It's more fun and goofy and things of that nature. But I love podcasting. I do that for fun. I also love different types of art when it comes to filmmaking. I went to college for that. I was a screenwriter, a playwright in Atlanta for a while. So I met Marlene, and Marlene is just such a wonderful person and invited me. I'm here, and Patrick, of course, allowing me to be here. So I'm excited to get the conversation going.
All right. Well, let's do just that. So why don't we start? I'm not, to be completely honest, this is how prepared I am. I'm not sure how this is going to go or what we're even going to talk about.
You're not prepared, Patrick.
I am not prepared. Absolutely not. So who wants to start and maybe tell us what's on their mind? And of course, I've been thinking about doing a show like this for a long time. We actually did a show about women a long time ago. It was, of course, a different context, but I felt like there was never a good time, and now there are all these scandals, and I don't want to focus on them too much, but I guess we should address them if someone wants to. Anyone wants to go first? Yeah, go ahead, Shay.
This is Shay. There's so much going on, and I think the interesting part about it is it's all sort of coming to a boil now. But this is something that's been happening for a long time, and I think what's sort of putting it towards that boil is that there is the support. There are the men behind it saying this is wrong. And it's like, it's been wrong, and people have been saying that it's wrong. But of course, now that everyone sort of is looking at it, that's when people who've had allegations against them for years, where women have said something, now it's being brought to light. Just if we're going to talk about news, we're going to talk about things of that nature. Think about Harvey Weinstein and things that are going on with him, and how these women have been making allegations for years, and it's been being swept under the rug. And now all of a sudden, because he's gotten fired, it's just this trickle down of all these actors that everyone loves and everyone sees is their idols are starting to fall. And I know a lot of people are like, well, but I love his work, or I love their work. And I think there's that separation of, do you still appreciate the work, but dislike the person as well? And how does that go in hand? And I know a lot of people are conflicted about that, but they have to understand that this conflict has been going on for the people that have come in, the men, the women that have come out. This conflict has been going on with them, torment almost, since whatever happened to them. So how do you give that support? How do you give that opinion and saying, hey, well, I really like House of Cards, but everything going on with Kevin Spacey, what do you do? Do they lose everything? So I know I threw a bunch of stuff in there, but just to get things started, we'll mix back.
It is definitely a difficult question to answer for people to enjoy that work, but I'd like to ask all of you, I think for me, speaking as a man, usually when I see these things coming to light, I'm like, the first reaction is kind of disbelief. Like, I can't believe that this is happening, or that it happened, or, you know, it's kind of an unimaginable thing. And I think it's not quite
for
the same reaction.
Yeah,
for me. So how do you guys react when things like that happen? Oh,
I'd like to jump in on that. So recently, just in the last few days, I think it started last Thursday, there was a Washington Post expose about a guy named Roy Moore, who is running for Senate. I think it's Senate. I'm bad at this, which is why I've not been. Okay, good. Thank you. Correct me on any of the political stuff. But what broke was that they found this woman who, when she was 14 years old, was approached by this guy, Roy Moore, and he flattered her quite a bit, and he convinced her to go with him back to his house. Now, he didn't rape her, but he did things that are illegal under even state law in Alabama. And the thing that really struck me when I was reading the article and reading the quotes from this woman, I mean, this happened 40 years ago, so there's a lot of, well, why did she wait 40 years? But exactly to your point, Patrick, she said, I was 14 years old, and I was so flattered that an older man was paying attention to me that I went with him. And that was the words that just went, oh my God, I absolutely would have done that at 14. An older man making advances to me. I mean, you're just starting to figure out, like, how do I be attractive to the other sex? And it's like, that gave me chills. When I read that line, I was 100% certain she was telling the truth.
You mean because... yeah, I'm not,
because I could resonate to that feeling, because I could just totally, I mean, you would think, well, what an idiot, you know, why did she go with this older man? She shouldn't have done that. But no, my reaction was, oh my God, I totally would have done that. Absolutely would have
and
done
that's why we have laws that prohibit that kind of thing, I suppose. But
well, at least, I mean, I can only speak to, for example, with the Team USA doctor, Larry Nassar, where these are 13, 14-year-old girls, 12, 13, 14-year-old girls that he's traveling with, and he's their team doctor. I'm not sure if you know about this scandal that just happened.
I don't, actually.
Where he's being indicted, not indicted, but he for sexually assaulting over, I don't want to say, it's a large number. But this is the Team USA doctor. He's traveling with the women's gymnastic team, where he would go and take these girls as they were traveling abroad and saying, "Hey, well, I know you want to be more flexible if you want to do this. Well, I know these certain stretches that we can do.
Oh my God!
And I know that there's certain there's certain things, you know, that pressure points that I could hit that will help you heal faster, that'll help you stretch better, that'll help you compete better." And this man was essentially assaulting these girls, getting them alone in his hotel room. And this has been going on for years. And this is these athletes that have I believe Allie Reisman said that this happened to her, as well as I think Michaela Mulrooney said the same thing. She was 13 years old, and this man is bringing her back to a hotel room, opening her legs, doing these things, and under the guise of a doctor. And this is,
so again, a position of power, right?
A position of power. And you're thinking, oh, well, why didn't the girl say anything? Well, this man is a doctor that your parents have left you alone with, and a lot of people wonder, like, what happened? Where were the other? Because I know I asked that question myself. I'm like, where are the other adults seeing 13, 14-year-old girls coming out of this man's room? But again, they're like, oh, he's a doctor. He's not going to do anything. He's this, that, or whatever. But this is like years and years, like even older gymnasts said, like, this is what happened. This man called this procedures. And it's like how, like, this is happening to younger girls, how you're supposed to, like, how are you supposed to feel safe leaving your child anywhere? And again, this we're talking about females in general, but even with males, it happens too. But it's that position of power. It's someone being in that mindset of, wow, I can do anything I want and not get caught. And I'm saying that these are stretches. I'm saying that these are procedures, and feeding these terms to these girls. And it's unfortunate. And now I know that every man isn't like this, but there are some that are.
And I think that's, sorry, go ahead.
No, continue.
I think that's a really important point, because I alluded to it earlier, but when men hear about these things, our reaction is, as I was saying, oh my God, that's incredible, that's unbelievable. like literally people men can't believe that this is actually happening. We're sort of being forced into believing that it is for most of us because we're seeing so many testimonies and so many of these incidents, including some regarding men, but mostly for women. But as I was saying, most women that I talk to tell me, yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all. That's how it is. We talk about, a field that in this crowd we know a little bit better, maybe harassment in video games and in live chat and in stuff like that. And it's these kinds of things that upset us as men have become very habitual for women. So I'd like to explore a little bit more of your experiences, if you have stuff to share. And so to try and give listeners a sort of an idea of how I don't want to say, I want to say normal women experience life, not the celebrities and not the actresses and not the super competent athletes, like our friends, our girlfriends, our wives, mothers, all of this. So Marlene, you were responding here.
Yeah, because I understand that if you perceive all these breaking news items, if you view them as individual incidents, I can understand that it feels like it's unbelievable that all these individual incidents are happening. And I think the big difference is that for most women, these are just extreme examples that are part of an experience that we live basically every day. And I think that's what makes it, that's why I really understand what Alison was saying, that you hear one of those stories and you're immediately like, I can instantly feel how she must have felt at that moment. And I can instantly understand what it did to her and how why she reacted in the way she reacted, including why she didn't tell her story earlier. I think that's a feeling that's very, very common to most women, because they've been living in a society that sort of brings about all these small things. So let me give you an example. For example, and I think one of the things is that it's so common for women that we just don't, we hardly ever mention these little things happening, which is why like our boyfriends or partners or dads who want to support us, they don't know because we don't tell them every little incident. So, for example, it's about being in a crowded bus and a couple people passing you to go to the back. And then, for example, there'll be two women passing you without a problem, and then there'll be a man passing you. And for some reason, even though he is of like the same physique as the women who just passed you, for some reason, you are very much aware of his hips very, very much pressing on your butt. While the women had no problem passing you without making any uncomfortable contact. It's these tiny little things. We were at the supermarket, my mom and I, like a week ago. And there was this guy, I think he was like approximately 60 years old. And he was standing behind us at the register, and he was speaking really loudly, addressing mostly the lady at the register and my mom, really loudly. So you must have had a horrible week with all this Me Too nonsense. I don't like it. I don't like women who suddenly complain. I mean, you should have complained. You should have said no. There was this barrage of like a 60-year-old guy in the middle of the supermarket. He was, in the meantime, he was getting closer to my mom until like there was absolutely no reason because it wasn't crowded. But he was getting closer to my mom. He was standing basically like he was touching, like his jacket was touching her jacket. And he tilted his head towards her. He's like, don't you understand what I'm saying? Well, she had already like taken a couple steps back. So there's no, it's completely absurd. These things happening.
What's striking me here is that, as you mentioned, and I think it resonates a lot because I've listened to Alison's chit chat across the pond, the latest episode or the one before that. You talked about all of these little things that happened to you throughout your careers. And I think Bart in that episode, or maybe you called them paper cuts. And
yeah.
Sure.
I was in that episode. I just described just these little things that would happen. Like, I don't know. One of the examples was my boss, Bill. I was walking down the hall and he walks up behind me and he puts his arm around me and gives me a squeeze. And I said, and we were friends, I'd known him forever. It was no big deal. And I said, what the hell are you doing, Bill? And he said, I just took a sexual harassment class and I found out that the penalty for me making you have sex with me for a promotion was the same as if I did something like this. And I figured I'm going to get caught anyway. I might as well go for it. He was joking. It was funny, right? It was no big deal. But when I started recounting these things and realizing it was death by 1,000 paper cuts, there were so many little tiny things like that. I mean, I don't have a huge scandal story. It's a little thing. But after I did that episode, a woman wrote to me and said, you can die from an infected paper cut.
Yeah. And I mean, even beyond dying from an infected paper cut, it's like, imagine getting a paper cut every day. I mean, if you get a paper cut, you're a man, quote unquote. Like you go to work and someone uses a piece of paper and goes like sloop and gives you a paper cut. You're like, what the hell are you doing, Fred? Oh, that's not cool. Come on, stop it. That's not cool, but whatever. But if it happens every single day, I think even a paper cut is starting to become an issue. And in the Me Too category, sorry, Alison, you're already winning your bet, but I'll confess something to what Marlene was saying. I'm going to be very open here and extremely guilty. The bus thing or the metro thing. We have a lot of public transportation in France, in Paris, and I used to take the bus. I might, when I was a little bit younger, have pressed myself against, not like horribly, but it's just like these little things,
because
and you don't know how to behave, and you're like, whatever, it's not a big deal, like, and you're awkward and you're young, and I feel horrible about it now, but it's just it wasn't a thing, like it wasn't something that we were educated about, and I think it speaks to the fact that people don't know that this is. Anyway, I feel very self-conscious right now.
Can I jump in on that part, on the I don't know? Yeah. Because the thing is, you said there's been like a couple of sort of metaphors going around. Like, imagine if you're a person, if you're a guy and you're like, I don't know how to behave around women anymore because, everything could be misinterpreted. There's a couple of metaphors. One of the ones that I thought was really, really insightful. So imagine the other person, which in most cases, or in many cases, will be a woman. But women are not the only ones who are victims. Imagine that person is in a position of firing you. Would you still do it? Because if you don't, then it's wrong.
Yeah.
So can I jump in?
Oh, of course.
Sure.
I hate to interrupt women because it happens all the time. So I'm very conscious of that. But I have an analogy that just happened today to my husband that I think is really relevant for this idea. And first of all, Patrick, thank you for sharing that. It's a huge deal to support men in understanding it.
I really feel bad. I'm sweating. Honestly, I didn't. Anyway, sorry. Yeah.
That's great. No, it's great. And I'll share a story later about a 2-hour conversation with a very good man about how hard it is to kind of wrap your head around it. It's some of this stuff. But anyway, let me share this example. So, collectively, women, raise your hand if you've been on public transportation and seen a man masturbating while looking at you.
Oh, yes. I lived in New York for 5 years, and That's a standard on
standard. Yeah, that's just normal, right?
So,
wow,
yeah, that's happened to me.
We don't have public transportation in California, in Southern California, to speak of. So I've been spared that.
Right.
Yikes.
Okay, so it's pretty common, especially if you live somewhere, where that's a common way of getting around. So today, my husband's coming home on the train, and a intoxicated guy has an axe. I mean, this is not America, so it wasn't a gun, but it was an axe, and he was threatening a passenger because he wanted money, and the guy wouldn't give him money. And he just kind of started hacking at one of the chairs. And this is all 2 feet away from where my husband's standing. And everyone is in shock and panic and sort of, what do we do? And should we tackle him? They're kind of having a collective traumatic moment with, fortunately, a drunk enough, uncoordinated enough person with an axe. He couldn't really harm anybody. And his friend kind of talked him down, and everyone went on their merry way. Now, I want you to take those 2 experiences and you think, yeah, they're both pretty traumatic, but the one is traumatic for you alone because you are alone feeling it. So take that feeling of a guy with an axe, and you're alone on that train instead of in rush hour with 100 other people. You are the only one feeling threatened. You are the only one. You're being picked out of the crowd to be victimized, whereas this guy was scaring everyone collectively. The feeling isn't different. The feeling is just the same. It's just only you get it, and you carry it, and you carry that weight, versus maybe collectively we have something to work towards, fixing a problem.
I guess it's easy to de-dramatize. Is that a word in English? In French, you think like to make it not a big deal when you can share it with people, but when you're alone with it. Sorry, Shay, I interrupted. Go ahead.
No, it's fine. I was just holding off. Even to piggyback on that, I know, like with the whole Me Too, everything, I read a couple stories and I decided to share my own story. And maybe Marlene has seen it, I'm not sure. But since we're even talking on transit, this is a good segue. I know when I lived in New York, I used to work at Viacom as an intern, and I would have to get up at like 6 o'clock in the morning to walk to the train by myself, to get on transit, to take the 45-minute ride, to switch trains to get to work. And I remember it being about like 7-ish in the morning, and I'm on a crowded one train. It is cold. I have on a bubble coat, and I feel on the train, everyone's there, everyone's going to work, and I feel someone's hand on my behind. And I'm thinking, okay, it's a crowded train. You know what happens? People's hands move. And I just remember feeling it very clear on my behind and remembering, I have on a bubble coat. I shouldn't feel someone's hand on me. And then I start to feel this man start to hunt me on a crowded train at 7-something in the morning. And I'm just like, I'm in, people say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. I was in shock. I'm like, is this happening to me right now? And it's a crowded train. Everyone sees this happening. No one's doing anything. And it took me a moment to kind of get together. And I just elbowed this guy in the stomach, because, again, I'm like, you're doing this because you're not expecting me to react. Now, mind you, in that moment of reacting, of course, you hit him, you do this. And this is the difference between, like, in my opinion, being reacting as a woman. Is I don't know if this guy has a knife on me or a gun on me, and if I make a move, he's going to hurt me. I don't know if he's deciding to get his sexual kicks because, I've got a knife to this woman's back and she doesn't know. I have to take 2 seconds to think about all this. Is me reacting worth getting stabbed? Is me reacting worth getting shot? I don't know if he's going to try and hit me. Is it worth that? And in that moment, I felt, okay, I was on a crowded train. It was worth it. I elbowed him and just said, what the F are you doing? And he kind of looked at me a little shocked that I actually reacted. And then he just went down the train, and no one said anything. And I remember thinking that day, like, oh my God, this is like, is this a crazy New York train story? This is so crazy. And I told people about the story and I was laughing. I'm like, oh my God, this guy did this to me. Isn't that so crazy? And then later on that night, one of my friends, as I told this story to her, I was like, yeah, this guy like reached up my coat and humped me on the train. Isn't that crazy? And she just goes, are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. Why would I not be okay? She goes, because a man stuck his hand up your coat and humped you on a train. That's scary. Are you okay? And it took me a moment, and I wanted to cry. And I was like, I had been like compartmentalizing this. I'm like, this is so funny. This is like explaining it to myself. And then I understand why.
Because it was so absurd.
Yeah, it was so absurd. And people don't say anything because I was explaining it in my head because I wasn't dressed provocatively. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't, by myself.
But you thought about that, didn't you? Was I dressed provocatively?
But I'm like, bubble coat. Like, this is, I don't know why you're turned on by a bubble coat, but Jesus Christ, like, it's one of those things where it took me a moment to realize that I knew that it affected me, but I had automatically put up this wall to explain why it happened.
Yeah.
Well, and also, sorry to be the therapist, but you were processing it all day long. You were telling other people in a funny way, in a non like, this is funny, but seeking support because the reality of it is fairly horrifying. And I think that's kind of what we're seeing with the hashtag Me Too, is how incredibly therapeutic it is for people to share this stuff for the first time, some of them in 20, 30, 40 years. Or, that need to say, this happened to me, and do you believe me, is so crucial to healing. So it's an example of this thing that I think we are witnessing, and that's what's so wonderful about the support people are getting, and also what's so scary about the bashing that does go on the internet, because it is such a vulnerable place.
You bring up a good point there. One of the reasons I did my women's story, I couldn't think of a better name. It's kind of a stupid name, but it worked. Was because I wanted to get it off my chest. I don't think it's a stupid
name.
Oh, okay. I listen to the name of my podcast. I'm not good at naming things, but I felt like I needed to get off my chest. And what was interesting was that my husband of 34 years heard things that he hadn't heard before. When I was, I think around 12 or 13 years old, I went on a date to see the 10 Commandments with a boy. And we walked back through the woods. This was rural Indiana. And I was attacked by some young boys. And I have no memory of how I got away from them. I know I did, but I don't remember anything about what happened. I know I got knocked down into the leaves, and I know I got back up and I wasn't with them anymore, but I don't actually remember what happened. And my husband had never heard that story. I'd never told anyone that story in my entire life. But this Me Too thing is freeing to say, okay, if we all compare these notes and look around, okay, that's it, like you said about the bubble coat. You started saying, well, was I dressed provocatively? Well, no, I wasn't. Why did that even come into your head? Right?
Exactly.
We think of these things,
and just the need to excuse it as something funny that happened. Like, oh, this is just again crazy New York train story. Like, I feel like. And this is just me, unfortunately, making an assumption. But Patrick, I feel like something like that, like if you were riding a train and some man stuck his hand up your coat and started humping you, I feel like your reaction would be a lot different than my reaction, or the thought process would be different.
I think it would be a weird. It would actually be just a crazy New York story. I would just elbow them much faster. I would get away. It would happen. It would start happening, and I would elbow him or like push them away, and that leads me to a question. I think that a lot of men, if I'm playing dumb / playing devil's advocate, whatever you want to call it, which is something I really do in my in these shows, because I want to ask the questions that maybe some of the audience would ask themselves. My favorite thing you do. Thank you. I think a lot of people would think, well, okay, but this is not such a big deal, right? It's not. How would you react to someone saying, all right, someone got too close and was saying like, oh, Me Too thing in the supermarket and got too close to your mom, a little bit of invasion of private space here, someone put their hand on your butt, and it's not such a big deal, right? It's not the end of the world, right? So,
and I would say the difference between that is saying like a coat touching. This is me feeling someone's hand on my behind and then a hard on me. And someone dry humping me on it. And it doesn't like the way we're taught, that's not appropriate. And I think more or less, and again, it being New York, not even to excuse it as, again, the city, but this happened on a crowded train full of people that didn't see a problem with it. And, you have people looking away and just in disbelief, like, oh, they must know each other. Again, people make excuses like, oh, I don't have to intervene because they must know each other. They must, do this, do that together. This must be their thing. And for me, of course, I can't make excuses for anyone else in this, that was there, because again, they didn't know my relationship to this man until I elbowed him and said, what are you doing? And he left and he walked away.
I think what a lot of people would say is, but that incident was not, well, I mean, not even that, just that incident. Things you're talking about, like Alison was saying and Marlene was saying, it's like, but it's not, that doesn't cause trauma. It's
can I give you an example?
But I would say it does cause trauma, because that stayed with me, and I had to make up an example as to why this happened, or make it funny, or like till this day I remember that. Till this day, I ride trains with my back to the wall.
See,
I don't stand in the middle. I don't want anyone coming at me from behind. That changed my train riding experience, where I was somebody that walked home, walked from like the train, and I didn't live close to a train entrance. So I would walk maybe 20 minutes by myself. And even that scared me, because I didn't want someone to like, I shouldn't have to change the way I ride the train in fear that somebody is going to hunt me from behind. So,
Marlene,
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm really, really glad with that addition from Shay, because I think we should really ask the psychologist.
I'm ready. Just ask me. Go.
Because, so for example, the tiny thing. I think I was 16. I was in Rome with my parents on holiday. We were at the Spanish Stairs. It was beautiful, and it was really crowded because apparently there was some fashion thing going on. And a car was trying to move through the crowd. They probably had been told that they weren't allowed to, but I love Italian traffic, so the car pushed through anyway, which meant that the crowd was, being squeezed together even more. So as the car passed, and we got more space again, because people, moved out of each other's way again, I suddenly felt that all this time, I was wearing a wraparound skirt, and I suddenly felt that a guy, I assumed it was a guy. I don't know, because I never saw their face. I assumed this guy had his hands between my legs during this time. And so I only felt it when he took his hand away, because when it was happening, there was so much pressure on every part of your body that I just didn't specifically register that pressure from all the other people squeezing and pushing into me. That idea is still the reason why I don't go into crowds after more than 20 years, because it's not just the fact that it happened. It's the fact that I didn't even register. And by the time that I did register, I wasn't in time to see to which body that hand belonged to. Just the notion that these things can even happen to you without even being in the position to react, not even being able to notice. That scared the crap out of me.
Wow.
Wendy, so active, how did you put it? Active psychologist, practicing psychologist, acting psychologist.
Really active. Acting, yes, that's right. I want to throw a couple things out there really quick, just my anecdotal experience practicing since President Trump was elected has been really interesting. I mean, instead of Make America Great on his hat, it should say trigger warning, because the amount of trauma that has been brought up for women who have been assaulted, down to harassed, to any number of things by men in power, and were never held accountable. Nothing ever happened. I mean, the greatest trigger of all has been, here's someone with, in theory, the ultimate power, completely got away with what he had done. And so for them, I mean, it was week after week after week of me working with women who didn't even remember that they had been assaulted or didn't even realize how much it was still hurting them and a part of every day of their life, like standing on the train backwards, never going into crowd. Those are perfect examples of how trauma shows itself over a 20, 30-year lifespan to protect yourself from those events. And so that, I think this #MeToo is one of those things where there's this trigger happening, but there's also some really cool support that's coming with it, which is great. But I do want to explain something. I'm going to do a little boring science lesson really quick, because I think it's really crucial to answer the conundrum of, okay, a man hears this and he thinks, well, why don't they just blank? Why didn't you just elbow him or move away? Why did you freeze? Because first of all, humans are very bad at really understanding where someone else is coming from unless we can relate ourselves. So we usually relate it to us. So a man who's never been in any of those positions before has always felt in control and had enough power and physically safe. Can't fathom that, right? So one way to understand why women react often the way that you're seeing us react is the way the brain develops. So we have the very beginning, old part of our brain, which is the reptilian part of our brain, at the base of the brain, which is our fear response. We run, we freeze, we fight. If something's threatening, we figure that out. That's very, very old in us to figure that out because, of course, it keeps us alive and safe. And one of those responses, we often talk about fight or flight. So I'm either going to punch someone or I'm going to run away. But we don't often talk about two other ones. One is freezing, where our system literally shuts down and we can't move. And so you can see this in the animal world. Mice in particular will do this, other kind of rodents. A predator will get it in its mouth and it will, we used to call it playing dead, but it literally just freezes, shuts down. Its system stops working and it can't process the same. So to have distorted memories or even no memories or sort of missing period of time around an event is very, very common. But unfortunately, the people who investigate rapes and police who are often taking those reports have not had that knowledge for a lot of time and still are struggling to gain it. So thinking a woman's not telling the truth because she can't remember details or various things. But it is literally the brain protecting itself by shutting down. And another one that is rarely talked about is called fawning. So we have fight, flight, freeze, and fawn. And the fawn is, and ladies, you might recognize this when I describe it, it's someone with power, someone who's threatening. So we just sort of cater. Fawning, imagine sort of like cowing down and I'm sorry and making it better. And this often happens in abusive relationships or, when someone is threatened. Okay, so that's kind of at our base. And then the second layer of brain development is our mammalian brain. And that is the brain that says, get along. Like make sure that person's happy and healthy and give them food and nurture those around you. And essentially, it's our limbic system. And as it develops, it looks around and builds the world. It says, well, how do I relate with the world? Who am I and how am I treated? And what place do I have? And for girls and women, this development more often than in men, includes how do I make sure everyone else is okay? No one's embarrassed. How do I make sure everyone feels comfortable? And so as they're interacting in, let's say, an office, in a business setting, and there's a round table of discussion, and men who tend to just have a little compartment for feelings, not all of them, will say what is on their mind. They get valued for that. They get promoted for that. They are seen as strong leaders. And then women who speak their minds, we have a term for them, right? Okay, but then the other women have this very strong...
Wait. I want you... I'd like to be clear. When you say women who speak their mind, we have a term for that.
Yeah.
Aggressive is what she meant.
Okay.
Yeah, no, what I'm saying is we categorize them as those are the bitches, right?
Right, that's what you meant. Okay, I just wanted to make sure.
I just didn't want to swear, that was all.
It's fine.
So thanks for making me swear, Patrick.
You could have said the word, but yeah.
So
she wanted everyone to feel okay on the call, Patrick, and then you made her say a bad word.
Right,
I'm sorry,
Patrick,
I apologize. Sorry. I honestly wasn't sure if you were referring to that or something.
I was being sarcastic too, because no matter how you act as a woman, you're labeled something. So you're not speaking up, or you're too shy, or you're too quiet, or maybe you don't have any ideas, or if you do say those things, then you're labeled in different ways. But think about that setting. So take all the sex out of this for a second. Take that setting, And the mammalian part of your brain is reduce conflict, make sure everyone's getting along. And if there's a few people in the room who don't care about that at all, or happy to have the conflict, they're happy to create the ruckus, and it doesn't seem to faze them, they will do that. And then if there is, say, one woman in that room, and her limbic system has been developed around be nice, play nice. In fact, we know this. You can look at studies of classrooms. Teachers will tell girls to be nice something like 150 times more than they'll say be nice to a boy. So we have it built into, whether it's our parents or our schooling or whatever, we have it built into us to make sure everyone's playing fair and being nice. And so you take that moment on the train with Shay, that part of her question was, am I dressed appropriately? All the ways we blame victims, right? Well, it's her fault because she was dressed wrong, or, and then she has to decide, can I socially get away with pushing this person away from you? And Patrick, I doubt that ever crosses your mind. Is this socially appropriate for me to push this violation away? So to some extent, it's really important for people to realize there's more going on here than, hey, why didn't she just do what I would have done? There is an entire lifetime of being trained, as well as on a deep sort of feelings-based level in our systems to act maybe differently than a man might act in that scenario. But
I
then
think there's
blamed.
I wanted to chime in one thing though. I really appreciate the different levels of the brain that you were talking about. There's a piece though that I think is above and beyond that, and it has to have been more recent than mammalian or reptilian, I would think, is that part of her consideration was, what will happen to me if I do this? Am I going to does he have a knife? Does he have a gun? Is he going to hurt me in some way? Oh, I'm in a crowded place. I'm probably okay to do this. Now I will shove him. All of that had to come from personal experience and watching the news and all the different things that are in our brains to make us think about the consequences of the actions, on top of what you talked about of I'm supposed to play nice, not upset anybody, those pieces. And I think that's what's a huge difference for Patrick versus Shay, had they been in the same situation. His first thought would not be his personal safety.
I think
probably
maybe if I was in a bad part of town, there are, at some points in my life, I'm fairly fortunate. I didn't grow up in dangerous areas. We also have less dangerous areas than in other countries, maybe in France, but mostly I think it's fair to say that as a man, you said something about control earlier, Wendy, and I think it's fair to say that I feel in control most of the time. Yeah. I don't pay attention too much to what's happening around me. I'm not, scanning the crowd. I'm not paying attention to where I'm standing in the bus, and that is something that hasn't entered my every moment considerations, and I think that's not the case for you. I was going to say for you guys. Guys is gender neutral at this point, right? I can say
we will
for you
allow
guys.
it in this conversation.
All right, excellent.
In general, unfortunately, no. It doesn't work.
So what would be appropriate for
people?
But for you people sounds weird. What?
How about for you?
For y'all. Okay, for y'all. There you go.
Actually, unfortunately, I found out, and Shay can correct me if I'm wrong on this, the plural of y'all is all y'all.
Ah.
I'm not sure. I thought it was y'all, you all.
Y'all. Well,
I mean, y'all a lot. So
okay, good.
Y'all will work. I mean, the great thing about y'all is that it's you plural, which you don't have in English. So I think it works. We do have it in French. So it feels like for me, it's not something that I worry about all the time. But it seems like for you think it's on your mind all the time. Is that a correct assumption, or?
I think your experiences definitely do drive that. I don't feel in fear a lot, and
I don't mean in fear, but paying attention to your interactions with men and being aware of what's happening all the time. I don't care. I'm not aware. I'm like,
no.
I'll bring it up in, I guess we haven't really talked about in a work setting, but I'm a person where being from the South, everyone calls you sweetie, everybody calls you honey. I get this visceral reaction when someone calls me sweetie and honey, only because at work, I had people do it to me. I remember dealing with this male leasing office person who I don't deal with anymore. But when he would try and dismiss me, if he didn't have want to answer my question, he's like, "Oh, well, we'll try to figure that out, sweetie." And I'm just like, I feel it in my soul. And I don't like that. You can call me by my name. You can call me ma'am, but don't call me sweetie unless I know you. I know at my old job, I went into a department that was mostly men and older men. I'm 26 years old. And at the time I was 21 when I first went into that work environment, dealing with a bunch of older men who were sweet as can be, super nice, but certain things that they would say would make me uncomfortable. And to me, I couldn't say, "Oh, that makes me uncomfortable," because I was a young woman in this situation in a department full of men who were just going to call me a bitch if I said something, or most people. I feel as though, I don't know, you're an older man telling me that, "Oh, I wish I could take you home," or I should, "Oh, sweetheart, oh, beautiful," this, that, which is nice, which is great. I'm not uncomfortable with that. But you telling me, "Oh, we should go out sometime because this, that, or whatever," or, "Oh, that shirt is tight today, huh?" Like, no, don't say that to me, because
those are the paper cuts.
Exactly, because absolutely. I cannot react to that. A lot of people would say, "Yes, you can. You can say this. You can say that." No, I can't react to that. I had a situation where, where I worked, we had an emergency happen, and I was the one that solved the problem. And my male supervisor, who was over me, actively tried to thwart it being known that I was the one that fixed the problem, to the point where he would, excuse my language, he would shit talk me. "Oh, of course Shay wants to go do this because she always likes to go do that, or she always likes to be in charge of something." Like, no, just because you're complacent doesn't mean that I'm complacent. I'm 21 at the time, 21 years old. I want to move up in that position. And people see that as some men seeing that as a threat of someone wanting to do well. I'm a person where I like to work with the people around me. I'm not going to undermine you. I know I caught myself undermining myself because this man was my supervisor, and letting him say certain things to me that made me uncomfortable because this was my supervisor.
You, again, dumb question. You don't think that would happen to 21-year-old men in the same position?
Oh, no, definitely.
No.
I think I think if it were male on male, it would be different in the sense where they could probably say something. Again, I'm making an assumption. For myself, I mean, again, I don't know where you work, but an older man, depending on whatever their orientation is or not, wouldn't say to another male of the same orientation, like, "Oh, you look sexy today. That shirt looks real nice. Oh, you wearing that short skirt today, huh? Oh, you got dressed for me today, huh?" Has a man ever said that to you? To you?
Well, I'm sure some people listening are going to say, "Oh, it happens as well, male sexual harassment." It does.
Yeah.
The point isn't that it doesn't happen to men, right? But the point is the frequency at which it. I mean, obviously, we don't have to explain this. It's pretty obvious, but you all keep referencing older men, and in professional settings. I don't know if it's only older men, but it keeps coming back. No. But
it's not. At the time, I was the younger person, so that's just my personal experience. I'm sure it happens equally. A lot of people of the same age all the time. So,
Allison, you were in your job extremely qualified, usually or commonly more qualified than some of your male counterparts. Can you tell us a little bit how it went overall? I mean, I don't want to specifically go to fish for, inequality stories, but I know there have been some, and I'm curious how it went.
Well, the original job that I had. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, the original job that I had in mechanical engineering, there were, I could tell you 14 different little paper cut stories, but things like naked pictures of women on the walls were completely acceptable at that time. And I didn't know any better.
Let me stop you there. Why does it bother you? Again, playing dumb. Why is it a problem?
Why does what bother me?
Naked pictures of women on the wall.
I don't even know how to answer that, Patrick. No, there's nothing fun about that. It was disgusting.
So,
no,
at work.
How do you?
So Patrick,
I'm speechless.
At your job, if there were naked pictures of men all over the wall, would you think that was cool?
I think that's the difference. For a man, I think it would be, it's dumb, but it's not, the reaction is not the same, I don't think. And
what if they were all very well endowed? Just saying.
I think it would be the same. It's not a huge deal. And I think that's why, I mean, for me, I would understand because I think I understand the fact that it's inappropriate and that it would be, in this context of a discussion about women, I would just brush it off. Just like being a man, I would brush off so many of the concerns you're bringing.
But it's also, you don't go to work for that. You don't go to work to see naked. Like, as an engineer, you don't go to work to see naked women on the wall.
But I wouldn't go to work. Again, I'm really trying to get in the mind of some of the people listening who are hearing this, and as men who have gone through life, experiencing life as men, it wouldn't be a big deal. So I think it's...
Patrick, can I combine two things for you?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. So, because I think these two things are really not separate. How would you feel if you had somebody who was your superior or a colleague telling you, making comments about how you look, how they think you look pleasing to them, combined with pictures of naked men on the wall? Would that make you feel different?
Yeah, that's more uncomfortable. I agree.
So, that's it. That's exactly what I mean. It's not these single instances. It's because these single instances are always part of this collective system. And I understand that hearing a single instance makes you feel, it's weird, or maybe even funny, or just brush it off. But it's these combination of all these things together. I really wonder how you'd feel then. I'm not suggesting you should put yourself in that place.
Well, I'm my own boss, so it would be awkward.
Not to even make listeners
that would be really weird.
Not even to make the listeners feel like you can't flirt. Because flirting is something very different. And being attracted to someone is being different. I think for example, my situation was uncomfortable for me because these were married men telling me this. And me being in my, at the time in my younger 20s, and this is a married man telling me all of these things. And I'm like, I'm not comfortable with this. Not because you're married, but also because this, that, or whatever. But flirting is different. And I think that's when it gets to that larger conversation of consent. I know there's a story this is from a couple years ago, maybe not that long ago, where a college was offering was making it mandatory for their male students or all students to take consent classes, just because they don't want people to get, consent and assault skewed. And they had this student that protested the class and didn't want to go to it because he said, I don't need to take this class because I'm not a rapist. This is not what a rapist looks like. And that was his whole campaign, was posting, this is not what a rapist looks like. And everyone saying, you are the exact reason why you need to take this class.
Exactly.
This is, you need to learn.
I don't want to get too far away from Patrick's question because I'm really, really sad now.
Oh, no.
Because of that question. I'm really sad.
I want to make it clear. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm still just speechless that you asked that, maybe I understand in other countries naked pictures are more common, like in the newspapers and that sort of thing. But it's a fireable offense here now. I mean, you can't do that. It's like you asked me. So you actually need air every day? I mean, that's how absurd that question is to me, and I'm really, really, really sad.
So I don't. Yeah, go ahead, finish.
Go ahead.
I'll respond.
No, go ahead.
I want to make it clear that this wasn't an actual question from Patrick. It was a question
Okay.
from Dumb
They both
Patrick
almost
playing
won,
dumb
yeah.
as, you know.
Okay, I feel that does help because maybe there's not that many people that dumb. Okay, that
Well,
actually does help a
but it
lot.
happens.
At the same time, I mean, in France, certainly we are a lot more comfortable with nudity. That is absolutely the case. So maybe that plays into it a little bit. But I think the way Marlene put it made me understand it even better, because even though this is dumb, Patrick, I think there's a little part of it that a little part of me that thinks, you know, anyway, the way she put it was, it's not just the naked pictures, right? It's not,
It's everything that goes along with that.
exactly. The naked pictures mean something more. And I think as men, we see the naked pictures just as naked pictures. We see the arm around the shoulder just as an arm around the shoulder. So
let me finish that story then, because because that's exactly where I was going with it. Was so there were naked pictures on the wall, you know, the squeezing, all the, you know, to add 14 more stories like that. I was expecting to get a certain promotion, and they didn't give me the promotion. And I looked around and realized I was in an organization. Again, this is a 60,000 person company. My part of the organization was 250 people. I was the last female engineer to quit that organization. I looked around and it was only me left. And when I brought this up to my boss, he said, well, you know, there aren't a lot of women in mechanical engineering. And I said, okay, well, let's do some statistics. When I graduated, my class was 20% women. Let's say 3 out of 4 of those were civil, electrical, and chemical engineers. Let's say 5% were women. What is 5% of 250? Is it bigger than 0? You know, I mean, that's the conversation I had to have with this guy. And now the good news is, because it was a huge company, I was able to move within the company. I moved a mile and a half away, and I went to this world where there weren't naked pictures on the walls and there were women bosses. And it was completely different. I never ran into anything like what I ran into the other organization. And over the course of my career, there was little stuff that, I mean, even littler, but and I thought, oh, wow, the world has progressed. You know, I've run into a few things here and there that are stupid, you know, just stupid people. But it wasn't as pervasive as it used to be. But what really struck me was when the Uber story came out with, her last name's Fowler. I can never remember her first name, where she described Susan Fowler. Yeah. Where she described all of these incidents that happened. And just like you're saying, just naked pictures. The story that struck me the most was when she told the story about the jackets. They had everybody outfitted for jackets, logo jackets. They were beautiful leather jackets. And when they came out, they didn't give any of them to the women because they said, oh, there aren't enough of you. It was going to be too expensive. That was the story that struck me. Out of everything else that happened to her, that was the one that made me go, that's the symbolic thing that tells you that whole organization was horrible. And I didn't tell my stories because they weren't big deals, Patrick. I didn't tell it because it's like, you know, I'm looking at these women, they got raped, for crying out loud. What is my boss squeezed me, they were naked pictures on the wall stories? Those stories don't count. But yeah, they do.
Yeah. I think that's the most difficult thing to grasp. Again, for men, we've danced around this idea. Because in actuality, if it was just one of those stories happening in your whole life, or two, you know, over the course of 20, 30, 40 years, it wouldn't be that bad. But I think if you start imagining that the little things that happen all the time, and they do. And I think that's another thing that's hard to grasp for us men. It's that they do. We're so in control. We're so comfortable everywhere all the time for most of us that it's really hard for us to imagine what it does to your psyche, to your mind, when you are being confronted to all of those all the time. Wendy, maybe you can speak to that. But
yeah, I mean, there's a statistic that's the United States, and it's incredibly alarming that every 98 seconds someone in the U.S. is sexually assaulted. So that's 570 people a day who experience some form of sexual violence. And that's not the paper cuts. These are the big cuts. And, you know, I think about how many people are walking around traumatized, how many Because, I mean, we send people to war and they come back and they're traumatized, and we all understand that. But there isn't a lot of understanding. And I think that's what's so intriguing about this #MeToo thing is, what if it changes everything? And maybe that's way naive of me, but
oh yeah, at the end of this episode, we're telling everybody the answer, right?
Right, exactly. but just for a moment, imagine it changes everything. That the good guys who've been clueless are clued in, and in meetings, they are the first to stand up and say that's not appropriate. I mean, what would happen?
What would happen? What do you all think would happen if
I want to say something different would happen, but I have a question even for you, Wendy, or anyone, Marlene and Allison, that want to jump in, because I know with the whole Me Too hashtag, I was clicking through it, and just as much as there are men bashing it, there are a lot of women bashing it too. I don't know why they're joining, why they're telling their business. They're just, it's a bunch of, people crying wolf. Like, what do you think about the women that are against the Me Too movement as well?
So can I throw just my idea real quick is, because I've thought a lot about this, 3 out of 4 women in the United States will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. So are we talking about the 1 in 4 who hasn't? And are they, because really when you talk about the big stuff, they just can see that that's not me. That hasn't happened to me. But when you start to describe experiences on the bus or what a boss has said, the reality is, you're sort of swimming in the soup, and it's sometimes not so easy to recognize that those things have happened to you in some form until they do, and it's so obvious it sort of breaks you out of the bubble. There's a lot of experiences that maybe they're not registering. So I think there's sort of a response of like, well, that's not me, and I don't dress inappropriately, so of course it wouldn't happen to me. They use some of the same sort of victim blaming stuff to justify why they're so different. And people get annoyed at, internet hashtag stuff all the time. So I'm not surprised there are people that are doing that, but I would love to meet one of these women and therapeutically go through her history and see, are you really untouched by this? Have you really never experienced, first of all, sexism, then on top of that, sexual harassment in any form? Have you always been treated well? And if so, you need to share that because how is that possible? So I just think it's more of a matter of not being able to sort of access what is hard for them, feeling defensive of the power hierarchy structure. I mean, I think it's alarming to people, right? Like, this could be my brother or my dad or my father, if it can be Louis C.K. or if it can be, whoever it is going to fall next. I think there's some tendency to relate to the men, just like men do. So men, they'll hear about a boss who's been accused of sexual assault, and they'll jump to, oh, it's a witch hunt. Maybe quicker than they would if they were someone else, because they can relate to a man in power and how that fall might feel. So that empathy can sort of get placed with the person who has to defend themselves, the new victim, as they see it. And so they sort of jump to that. And I think there are women who similarly do that. They're going to relate more to sort of, I'm going to call them white men in power, than they do to women who have been victimized. And so they can quickly jump to needing to be protective of that group.
Wendy, something you said triggered something that maybe this will help Patrick and the other men listening. I was raised mostly by my father. My mother had this image that we used to bake cookies in the kitchen. I have no memory of ever doing that. All my memories are in the shop with my dad. And I had 3 brothers. So I grew up, playing football. I was really mad when my parents wouldn't let me play tackle anymore. I was in the shop. I became an engineer. I worked with men. I'm loud. I'm aggressive. I'm a bitch. Okay. Using those words. You know who I am in the meeting. I am not the wallflower. I am the woman who is going to speak up, and I'm aggressive, and I'm powerful. I'm strong. I run, I'm all of this stuff. I have to consciously realize all the time that women aren't like me, And I tried to tell that in my story was I think of the things that happened to me, and I wasn't quiet, I wasn't shy, I wasn't uncertain. I became uncertain over time. I began to doubt myself because of all these things. I would go, wow, I must not be very smart because I'm not getting promoted. This must be happening because it's something I'm doing wrong. And yet I'm not that kind of woman at all. So if you take a woman, and we had a lot of just fantastic training at work where I started to appreciate Asian women's, I'm going to stereotype, of course, but, quieter, not aggressive, wouldn't disrupt a meeting. How do they get treated? How much worse is it for them if I'm loud and aggressive and man-like in the way I attack things? If these things are still happening to me and making me doubt myself, what happens for the other women? And maybe that perspective, Patrick, could help from the men's perspective, because I'm more like you guys than I am like a typical woman.
Mm. Yeah,
I think there's in any situation completely like breaking out of the sexism thing. I think in every situation there are moments that we hear people describe things that have happened to them that they had to suffer through. And sometimes they are things that we ourselves have experienced as well. And for some reason, there can be many reasons for that. I'm sure they didn't have the same impact on us. So and in that case, it's really easy to relate to our own situation because we've been through that and we haven't suffered from it. Well, maybe we feel a bit different, I'm pretty sure there are plenty of women listening who'll say, yeah, I remember I was like sort of touched inappropriately in a crowd when I was younger. That's true. I still go to festivals and parties. So I really don't understand why this is so like stuck in her head. But in all honesty, we should really ask the psychologist.
No, this is awesome. Keep going.
But I'm pretty sure that it's really not up to us to sort of say that we need to validate somebody else's trauma. That's just not how trauma works, as far as I understand. Please.
It's there whether you believe it or not.
Yeah.
Right.
But go ahead, Patrick.
No, please, Shannon.
I was going to bring up a different facet. So if you wanted to add your 15 cents in,
I think. Well, what I wanted to say this, the way what you're all saying, the way that makes me feel is that I never have to think about the fact that I am a man. It's just doesn't really matter. And it feels to me, maybe I'm wrong, but it feels to me like just like some other forms of discrimination, maybe, people of color or immigrants or that kind of thing, you're kind of always aware of it. And being a woman, you're always aware of it. For me, I'm never actively aware, or not very often actively aware of the fact that I'm a man. Doesn't really cause any problem. I wonder if that resonates at all, or if I'm not understanding it right. But
yeah, that for me that resonates a lot. Actually, like a lot. Yeah,
it's in the little things though. For me, like when I walk out to my car at night from work, I would always have my finger on the button that sets off an alarm on my car. It would just be natural to do that. I look behind me.
And the keys between your fingers.
Between your fingers.
To poke someone's eyes out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So you all do that?
Just normal.
Yeah.
Yeah. Everyone does that.
Every woman. I haven't heard about men doing
every
that.
Woman.
Yeah.
Every woman.
Shannon, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to bring up another a facet of this, just because I'm just listening to you all is fascinating. And for those of you who are listening, maybe can't tell, I am African American. And when we were even talking about in the workplace and different things, I know, at least for myself, in some of the places that I've worked, women of color are few and far between. And when there are few and far between, it comes into a situation of where we're put into a position where we're competing against each other. Where it's just like there's, the token Black friend. There can only be the token Black female coworker here. And if I don't do something like someone else does, then I'm automatically compared to her and I'm the lesser employee and I'm the one that's going to be fired. Or, oh, me and so play around like that. How come I can't play around with you like that? And it's harrowing in a sense because I remember. I'm
sorry. What do you mean we play around like that? I'm not sure.
Say if you there's a show on HBO called Insecure that is amazing and people should watch it. But they have these two women that work in a law firm. One is a very proper, very to-do Black woman, and then there's another like girl that most people would consider a homegirl who's like loud, who's laughing, who's this, who's that, and a lot of them joke around with her and say different things, and they don't do it with the woman that's mild-mannered and I wouldn't say mild-mannered, but she's proper. You have to be you have to put on your work African American, which a lot of people have to do, unfortunately. And, they can make these jokes and they can say this and, oh, you're lame, you're doing this. You have to put on a facade. And it's like, you have to, because you're fitting into a sort of stereotype. And if you don't do that, if you don't play this role, then people look at you a certain way. I know for example, in that episode of Insecure, her boss, who happened to be Caucasian, came to her and said, well, hey, can you talk to this girl? Because you two could probably relate. They don't know each other. She hasn't, this is a woman that's worked hard to get where she is. And now she has to be compared to somebody that's unprofessional just because of the color of their skin. But even bringing it to what we're talking about, women in general, when it comes to assault and when it comes to sexual violence, there's maybe this is just me and I can only tell from my personal experiences, is that there's a pressure and there is a weight that is heavy on you, especially within the Black community. Say if you get assaulted by a Black male, there's that, well, you don't want to put another Black man in jail. You don't want to, our system is messed up enough. You don't want to do that. Was it really what you said it was? Are you sure he wasn't just playing around? Are you sure he wasn't flirting? If it's an athlete, you're going to ruin their career because they, worked this hard to get to where they are. You can't say anything. Or if they're an artist or a rapper or something like that, you have to say, well, you're obviously making it because you're going for a come up because of the way you are and the way you were raised. And it's that I'm not sure if it's I can only relate to my experiences, but it's that community pressure that sometimes is almost as suffocating as just the pressure of being a woman as well. And it's just giving a different take on it, just because I always, there's an article in the LA Times, I can look it up right now, and when we were talking about it, it's by Lauren Rosenblatt, and it's talking about African American women and why they don't report campus rapes, or why it's harder for them to report campus rapes. And I was reading that, and it's just so harrowing because it's the same thing as the workplace. It's the same thing in society. It's just you have, a people looking at you saying, well, you can't betray your people, but it's like you have to put your personal standings aside for a community. And where do you look out for yourself? I just think that's interesting.
That's really interesting, Shay.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I think there's layers for each group that struggle with this. I mean, the suicide rate and the rape rate of transgendered individuals and folks of color and mixed, all sorts of things. I mean, it's higher, of course, than it should be. And something to acknowledge as well, that it's double layers sometimes for folks.
There was one thing I wanted to dig into a little bit, and Shay made me think of it, is some of the words that we use, like you referred to a girl. There was a girl in this episode, and I jumped down the throat of a friend of mine because he referred to this girl in marketing, and I just looked at him. I just said, "What? Why did you just call her a girl?" And he said, like a guy, a girl. I said, "No, girl is with boy." And he's like, "What are you talking about? You always call girl." I said, "Okay, think of a boss you've had who's a woman, Now call her a girl in a sentence. Let me hear you say that. That girl I worked for. No, you would never say that if she was someone that you respected. And we really got into it, and he did not buy it at all. And he is an African American guy. And I said, well, am I allowed to call you a boy? I mean, because that's got a whole connotation, right? I mean, it's just like that. And he didn't see it. We argued for 45 minutes and he couldn't see it.
I know a guy that calls women chicks, and I always, I'm just like.
Usually when I call him on it, they say gal. And I said, no, now you sound like you're in the 1950s. He goes, well, what am I supposed to call you? And he says,
that's
lady.
a valid question,
and I said,
though.
no. Well, lady implies
woman?
character.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree.
It's an obvious answer, and they don't know it.
That's the first place my mind went to as well. But woman is the equivalent to men. The point I'm trying to make is there isn't an equivalent to guy. So people default to girl, which is obviously less than ideal. But
isn't gal, guy and gal?
Is it ladies?
well,
no, it's
that's
women.
lady in marketing sounds weird.
Ladies and lads.
Lady
Sounds
implies character.
Old.
Yeah.
I mean,
But there isn't an equivalent to guy, right? And that's why we don't, I was asking, so can I say you guys? And obviously it doesn't fit, but there isn't an equivalent to, and maybe that's part of the problem, right? Maybe we didn't develop that word. But
let me explain this I did a Facebook post that I got a lot of resonance to. I said, what if just for 1 year, let's have everybody agree that when you generically refer to a person, you say her. So that I tell you the plumber was late today. You say, oh, why was she late? If I say that guy was, or that my doctor told me blah blah blah. Oh, what did she say? What if we just use she and her generically for just 1 year, and then we can all go back to assuming it's a man? But would that change the way we think? And I've started to try to do it, and everybody wrote back saying, "Man, that's a great idea."
So Marlene, I do this with my kids. We only say female for any story we're telling.
Oh, interesting.
Cool.
Yeah, so we're going to see what happens in 20 years. We'll let you know.
When my daughter was 5, she got a new doctor, and it was going to be a boy. And I told her about him, and she said, "Oh, I didn't know boys could be doctors."
Wow,
it's the most beautiful thing ever.
Can I transition this into something really quick about young people, because it's really interesting.
I'll just say something very, very quickly, and then I'll give it back to you. We talked about it in the latest episode of the show, but there is this debate happening in France with inclusive writing, where because we have gendered nouns, so this became a thing basically. So that made me think of it. But I recently read *Sapiens* by it's a really fascinating story about basically the history of the human species. And in that book, the man who wrote it, called Yuval something Hariri, he actually does that, switching indiscriminately in his in his examples from male to female pronouns. And it's just, it's just wonderful. It works. And there's no reason why we couldn't do it. Just
But it sounds weird, doesn't it?
It you know what? It doesn't. Initially, you sort of think,
okay.
Oh, he used, so he would say, and the, I'm not going to parrot his book, but basically he does it. It works. And I think it could be something that we use more often. Sorry, Wendy.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the children are the future. That's the answer to this. So here we go. You ready? So Sweden is pretty advanced when it comes to a lot of this. They do a lot of talking. I'll tell you, my son he's 12. He's had 3 girlfriends. They've all asked him out. I mean, very progressive in this regard. Everyone pays for themselves in meals, and it's very much culturally being built in. I mean, the majority of professionals I interact with on a daily basis, from medical care to dental care to you name it, are women, and so it's very different and awesome at the same time. So now the hashtag Me Too comes out. Sweden's got to say something, right? They have a few people who've come out themselves that are pretty well known and some things. So there's that. But there was this great article by a preschool teacher, and I just love that we could start with preschool. And she talked about all the ways with very young children, we start to train them to sort of move away from what they know they want or what's okay and what feels good for them to what is socially acceptable. And so she gives this example, and I think there's not a parent out here who hasn't done this, but, you know, of two little kids at a preschool, one wants to give the other kid a hug, and one child doesn't want the hug. They don't want to be touched. They don't want to be hugged. And they make that clear. And then all the adults in the room convince the child otherwise, convince them to just hug the child, to just, you know, come on, just hug him. It's not a big deal. So we do, for social smoothing over, we, instead of allowing that child to have her own feelings, her own experience, her own right to her own body in that moment, sort of the big people with all the power tell her, no, you need to hug Jimmy because he wants a hug or she wants a hug. And so if you think about sort of those basic, how we tell kids in so many ways not to trust their gut, not to trust that they know what they want is the right thing that they want. And so, I mean, I think we have to start very young. I think that's what's so cool about this happening now. I talked to a friend today who has a 15-year-old daughter, and a boy is texting her, not sexually explicit things at this point, nothing sort of inappropriate, but she had previously had a guy sort of texting her and she wasn't interested, and it was torture for her. And so this second round, this kid starts texting her and she says to her mom, I'm done. I can't go through this again. I have to, what's the next step, Mom? What do I do? And they sit down and they have to talk about, you know, and for my friend who is a Gen Xer, she didn't know how to do that either. So she's got to figure it out herself. What does this Me Too thing mean to me? What have I been through? And then how do I then talk to my kids? And Marlene, I'd love for you to talk about the dad article you read, because I think dads play a sort of particularly good role in this, and how we train our kids to tune into what they want, to say what they want. And unfortunately, you know, the consequences socially might be difficult, but if they have the examples of it and sort of the training early, it can make a huge difference in just sort of respecting other spaces, respecting yourself and what you know and what you want, rather than society saying, no, do it this way because we need you to be nice, or we need you to acquiesce so everyone feels comfortable.
There's an old commercial. I'd say it's old. It's probably not that old, but the I'm Sorry commercial. I don't know if you all remember that, where it is a commercial where it's just a compilation of just women saying, I'm sorry. Like somebody, they accidentally cut in front of somebody. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I have a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Can you do this for me? And talking to different, men, and mostly talking to men, mainly women, but it's like, why do you have to be sorry? Why do you have to be sorry? You have to ask the question. Why do you have to be sorry that, you accidentally bumped it? Well, of course, you accidentally bumped into somebody, but you're just, instead of saying, excuse me, I'm sorry, or I'm sorry, I have a question. Why are you sorry you have a question? And it's trying to take the phrase, I'm sorry, out of that vocabulary when it comes to just personal things. Because why are you sorry? And that's always stuck with me. And I know I try to work on that as well, because I'm a person, I apologize for everything, even if I didn't do anything wrong. Women
are so much nicer than me.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's like a Southern thing. I don't know if it's, the way that my parents raised me or the way that my mother raised me. I'm always, be polite. Yes, ma'am. Like if someone's talking and you interrupt, say sorry, and that commercial, I have to link it. It stuck with me just because you don't have to be sorry for everything that you do. You don't have to, if you're asking a question, why are you sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. This might be a dumb question. Why are you don't know if it's a dumb question or not. And women do that a lot. And it's just that, like, why is it, why do we have to apologize for asking a question? Why do we have to apologize for just simple, like, colloquial things? It's an interesting commercial. It's an interesting thought.
I think it comes back a little bit to education as well, and maybe in some cases there's, I'm sure some men will say, oh, but I say that as well when I want to ask a question. But with everything we've been talking about, I don't think it it is exactly the same thing. And in Finland as well, by the way, we have, my wife was telling me about a new directive from the Ministry of Education that says in preschool, or kindergarten, maybe, the teachers can't address, the boys and the girls as the boys and the girls in different groups. Like, you can't separate them like that anymore. And I think this idea, I'm sure a lot of people listening are going to be a little bit going to the, oh my God, that's too much. Like, what's next? We're going to address chairs and people together? Like,
no, this is really valuable, actually.
Do you have any experience with that, Marlene? I saw you agreeing earlier, but...
Well, so the thing is, so yes, I feel really weird discussing this when we have an actual psychologist on the on the call.
I'm sure she'll tell you if you got something wrong.
Apologize first, Marlene. Yeah. Marlene, apologize before you talk.
Yeah, then it works.
Right. So, see, that's it. What's confusing is that, yeah, there are things that, on average, girls like to do more than boys, especially at young ages. That's true. But we know with every distinction that we make amongst people, if it's about race, if it's about gender, if it's about orientation, all these things, we know that even though there are averages in which these groups are alike, that still there is the same differentiation within that group. So no stereotype. A stereotype is, I think, it can help in like a split-second situation. It makes us think. It helps us to say, is this a dangerous situation? And they have an instant thing. But in education, that's different, because we need to address every child. We need to address every person. And if we know that all these ideas about gender are so socially ingrained, we start doing that at a really, really, really young age. And I don't know if you've seen this video on, I think it's a British video. It went around on Facebook about that these two little kids, really like babies, a boy and a girl. What they did was they changed their clothes. So the girl would be dressed like a boy and the boy would be dressed like a girl.
Which already is a problem in itself, dressing boys and girls differently.
Yeah, I'm with you. But for this experiment, for this experiment, it worked. And they they gave these children in the care of somebody who a kindergarten educator. And these, I think there were only women in the video. I don't know for sure. They would all say that they didn't approach the kids differently because of the gender, but obviously the video shows that they did. So I can really understand how making these, ingraining these things in the law, or at least making guidelines about this, is making people who are really honestly trying to be aware of not stereotyping. And just because we're human beings, we, at moments we can't help, it just slips through, it just happens, to help make them be even more aware. So in that case, I can really understand how these kinds of guidelines are honestly valuable. If you just say, well, that's not the intention, if you just don't do it, then you don't do it. That's not how it works, because these are things we do really without knowing that we do them.
Marlene, this makes me think, I really deep down believe that maybe what we really should be doing is educating girls and boys in two separate tracks. And one of the great examples, Harvey Mudd is a highly avowed engineering and computer science math school in California. And I think she was the head of the computer science program not the whole school. She might have been the dean of the school. She put in place a program where the computer science first year students were separated, boys and girls. And they went from 20% graduating as women, because the feed into the school was 50-50, but they found that by the time they graduated, it was like 20% women. And she put together this program where the women were separate from the men, and they got to past 50% graduation rate for the women. And what they found was that, at least, and it's surprising to me that this is still true, but she said that they discovered that the women coming into first year believed they had the math, they had the intellect to do the job or to learn, but the boys started already knowing how to program a little bit. And so the language of the professor would shift towards what the boys already knew, and the women got left behind. When they separate them, then the professors would adapt to whatever their audience was, and they found that they got the same graduating class. 50-50. And so that, with what you're describing right there, if you even subconsciously are biased, where these people, I'm sure they believe they weren't doing anything biased, but they still were. Maybe if we were just, split us in half the whole way.
Maybe that's a solution. Oh, sorry. Wendy.
I was just going to say, there's a study with employment job searches, and what they found that men will apply for a job they're 60% qualified for, and women will apply for a job they're 100% qualified for.
Yes.
So that kind of confidence. Now, let's go back to our sort of magical thesis of what if everything changes? What if women were not traumatized, but also, and of course, I know there's men out there too who are traumatized, but we're also confident, because I think there is a absolute connection there with this ability to feel like you can just do anything when you're told in many ways and shapes and forms that you can't, and sort of knocked down in these sexual ways as well. It's just shocking when we look at some of these differences and why they still exist. And maybe this is the tipping
Wendy,
point.
Do you know if they only split that between men and women? Was there also a difference in like the how do you say that? Like the confidence of white male versus guys of color, man of color?
Right. That particular study wasn't differentiating between color, but it did go through it was sort of answering the question of why women are making less than men for the same job, of trying to understand their interview styles. And it goes back again to this premise of sort of the limbic system and the mammalian brain of what I do to get along. I say sorry. I downplay my achievements in a interview because my mother told me to do that, never brag, or whatever it may be. And in the end, you got a guy who's only 60% qualified who's like, I'm awesome. And they're like, you seem awesome. Let's do this. And, we wonder what's happening. And I think, again, it starts very young age. And
the reason I'm asking is because I think many times that we talk about like feeling like my notion as a white woman of the many men I meet, which are on average mostly white men, they really like in our Dutch society, they really feel in control. They're like, let me point that out. If they are not visibly disabled, if they're not gay, so if they fit like sort of the generic human stereotype of like a white middle-aged heterosexual non-disabled guy, like for example my boyfriend for 16 years, he like the notion of not being in control is like just completely foreign to him. And I was wondering if, so I can really understand the idea. Well, I think I can handle that and being really confident. But I was wondering if it's only like a gender split, or if it's also like if you are in any other way, like constantly being made aware, being othered, if that is a difference.
I would assume so. I mean, that study, not particularly, but I would absolutely assume so, that the need to make up for the otherness somehow, be extra qualified to, prove your. I mean, I think that's always been the case for other groups.
That I guess that's what I was referencing to also earlier, when I was saying I never feel not in control or not in a secure environment unless I go, as I was saying, to the bad part of town, which is not what we're talking about here. But all right, I think we're going to bring this to a close fairly soon. We could talk about all of this for a very long time. I would like to give each of you an opportunity maybe to address something that we didn't, something you wanted to say before we end the show. Che, you haven't spoken for a while. Is there something you wanted to bring up?
I haven't. I've just been listening. Everyone's just bringing great points. I think I brought it up a little bit earlier, but we didn't really kind of touch on it. But just even just talking about our experiences, I know even like not every man is bad. And I think that's where a lot of frustration comes from, at least when it comes from men, is that, well, apparently I can't do anything because people are going to think I'm this, or I'm trying to assault them, or I'm trying to. And I think it's not that. I think there is a level of common sense that also goes into it. And if you're using your common...
Oops. I can't hear Shannon anymore.
CK. And I think the interest...
Sorry, you got cut off for a little bit. So you were saying if you use your common sense?
Oh, no. I said there is a common sense to it. And I know that there's a lot of guys out there, that's where the frustration comes from, is because they think I can't do anything because people think that I'm going to do this or that. I know something with Louis C.K. we briefly touched on. I think the harrowing part of that was that in his mind, he had consent. In his mind, I asked you if I can show you my penis. And even if you said yes or no, that's my consent. I asked you. Not understanding that even asking the question is putting someone in a position that he thought he had consent for. And I think just educating yourself and making sure that, hey, if this really, I'm a person where if it's at work, it's not appropriate, regardless. But if you're in a social situation and you just got to feel out cues, ask questions. But not questions like, hey, can I show you my penis? Like, get to know people, make sure that you're comfortable with them. I know for myself, I'm super open and I like to get to know people. And I'm a person that a lot of people, this is a thing that I do. If I'm listening to someone, I go, a lot. And a lot of people find that dismissive. But to me, that's me. I'm listening to every word that you're saying, and it comes off as flirty. And I'm a person that I understand that I come off that way, and I try to check myself. But what about? And I have to think about myself, like, why? If I'm listening to someone and I'm engaged in the conversation, how is that flirting? So I just hate that I have just understanding that us as women have to check ourselves a lot, where I feel like men don't check themselves as much. And maybe if that self-check system starts to come in, then it's not going to solve problems, but it'll make you more aware.
I think it's going to be a long time before everything goes away. But what Marlene was referencing earlier, like put yourself in a situation where you think, remove the sexual tension, like however small it might be. Imagine it's your boss, or we were saying last time, imagine it's The Rock, Dwayne Johnson that you're talking to. Would you be saying that to Dwayne Johnson? Or imagine someone would be doing what you're doing to you, like a prisoner in a prison where you are. Like, if that person was doing that to you, would you be comfortable? If the answer is no, then probably don't do it. But I think there are also situations where people want to flirt and they don't know if it's appropriate. And I think that's where some of the confusion or frustration even comes from. But the thing is,
it's just the checks and balances of it. It's complicated. And when we get to a lot of people think that, it's nitpicky, or they think, well, it's even that person, like that student who said, well, I'm not a rapist, I don't need to take a consent class. You do, because you might be put in a situation where you don't realize that you don't have consent. And now all of a sudden you see yourself as a good guy, but It's opening up that line of communication and talking to people, not just asking questions to validate yourself. That question of, can I show you this? Is so you can get something out of it. You're not trying to validate me. You're trying to validate yourself. So just being, I don't know if it's being comfortable with yourself. I don't know what the solution is, but as long as we start to address that it's a problem, that I think that's where we're going to start getting some headway.
And I think that we're always going to find situations where the guidelines or whatever don't work. There's always going to be some situation that you can come up with where it's like, well, what if I'm in that context and I do this, then this is going to be interpreted as that, or can't I do this even? And yes, there are going to be examples where it doesn't work, but I think what the last few months, and if we're being honest, decades and thousands of years have proven is that there is a problem there. And if we can address it, 50%, 70%, 90% of it, then that's probably something we should do. And if the consequence is that in some situations you feel like you can't have fun with someone that you want to flirt with, there's always going to be flirting. I don't think it's going to kill, men and women or romantic relationships, but we can all make a little bit of an effort. But
I can add.
Oh, I'm sorry. I think maybe you can even piggyback on this. Is that, imagine we're coming from a time where back in America it used to be okay to just slap women on the ass at work. Excuse my language. So we're coming into a time where women are starting to speak up for themselves, and you're going to hear it, and it'll be known.
And I think men can take it too. I'll get back to you just a second, Allison. I'm sorry, but I think men can take it. And it's incredibly insulting when men come out and say, oh, but then we can't even flirt I'm getting angry. We can take it. It's fine. It's okay.
Angry
We'll
Patrick
survive,
is my favorite
right?
Patrick, actually.
I can give some specific guidance to the men on this. I ended up being a manager of about 170 people, and with that many people, you end up with things that go wrong. And what HR taught me was that there's two things they look for: persistent and pervasive. So if you have I'm just going to say man for this example, if you have a man who is constantly, like the texting example to the young girl over and over and over, and you say no thank you and it keeps coming, that's persistent. Don't do that. The other one is pervasive. So if you have a guy in this example who goes to woman A and starts doing stuff to her, and then to woman B, woman C, woman D, woman E, you see this pattern of behavior across a bunch of women. That also is what gets you in trouble. If you ask a woman out on a date, you do not get in trouble for that at work. That is not going to happen. You ask her, she says no, you say, okay, bummer, move on. But don't also go down the line of every single woman in the whole organization at the same time. Those are the two things. Persistent and pervasive is where the problems really come in.
Or ask the same woman again 15 times.
Well, that's what I just said, persistent.
Yeah. Right.
So persistent is over and over and over again. Pervasive is asking all of them.
Right.
And if you keep that in mind, it's okay.
Yeah.
And one of the behaviors I think people get stuck into is thinking, well, everybody does it in this office, so it's okay. No, it's not okay. Everybody had naked pictures up on the wall. That did not make it okay. Everyone joked around like my boss did. That did not make it okay.
Let me throw out just a quick definition of consent. I worked for a while on the board of a rape recovery center in Salt Lake, and one of the cool achievements of that organization was to work directly with the fraternities at the local universities and be a part of their parties, be a part of trainings, be a part of a whole week where the boys in the fraternity, and they were boys because they were 18, where they were educating other fraternities and, really getting involved. It was really pretty cool. And one of the sort of key takeaways in understanding consent is a really important word, and that is enthusiastic mutual consent. And if you are drunk, you can't be enthusiastically consenting. If you are on some kind of drug, you can't be enthusiastically consenting. Enthusiastic, think about that. It's like, heck yeah, let's go. That's enthusiastic consent. And
that's really wonderful. Thanks, Wendy.
yeah, and anything other than that is probably not. Walk away. Yeah, maybe try another day or something. But this, I think that's a really
But not every day.
Not consistent, of course. Right.
I had one question I wanted to leave the other women with, and this doesn't have to be answered live, but to anybody listening is, I've got a 30-year-old daughter, and I mentor her a lot about work. And any advice you guys have for how I can explain things to her? And one of the things that was brought up here was that tentativeness of where men put themselves forward when they think they're 50% qualified and women 100%. And she's been really trying to work on, okay, I'm just going to put myself out there. If I think I've got a good shot, I might as well go ask for it. She's been asking, she asked for a raise. I mean, that's the kind of thing that men do and women don't, right?
Yeah.
So if there's ideas you guys have for her, I'd love to hear them at some point.
Well, we'll let everyone think about that. And I guess the last thing, I'm going to give it to Marlene at the end, but one thing I didn't want to mention that came to me when you were speaking now was the things can get better, and I think they have been getting better for a long time, however bad they are, and I think they are going to get even better than that. And one thing that came to me was the use of the word gay, especially in the gaming community, as an insult on voice chat and stuff like that. Of course, the gaming community is something I know a little bit better than other communities. And it was very pervasive. In the mid-2000s, people would say just, oh, that's gay. And you know how gay was being used. And it came to prominence at some point. I think I mentioned this on a previous show, but at some point, people started thinking about this and saying, yeah, that's not really cool. And the mere fact that we started talking about it, and that some people, when it was being used, would say, hey, that's not cool, and not necessarily make a huge deal about it, but speaking up a little bit. Now I think it's linked to it, but now it's not being used at all, or at least I don't hear it. It's not real problems. So I think it is possible. It takes a little bit from everyone, and it doesn't necessarily need to become, I mean, in the naked pictures example, I think if that was outrageous in that context, but if someone had said, or if you people, the first time someone says, "Hey, dude, that's not cool," maybe you go like, "Oh, whatever, you're no fun." Second time someone says, "Hey, that's not cool." Third time, fourth time, at some point it changes the mood, right? And what's socially acceptable. So I think that's something that if men and the people on the giving end of the inequity in general, what we can do to help is just mention that's not cool. If there's a remark or a little something that happens that you notice, don't necessarily put them out in front of everyone, but go see them a little bit afterwards, or I thought that wasn't great what you did, or maybe she didn't take it the right way, or maybe these kinds of things, the little things change minds, I think. So I think we can all help with that. What do you think? Would that help? Is that not enough?
No, I think that's great.
Oh, Patrick, you
Nothing
are
is enough.
This has been so great. It's just hard to watch you squirm a little, but it's also kind of fun because it is. It's kind of rare for one man to sit and listen to four women. I mean, how often is this happening on a regular basis? And maybe it is, and I'm missing it, but of really trying to understand and really hear what women's experiences are is huge. So thank you. That's
I wasn't fishing for thanks, but I'm glad. But I mean, what do you say? It's adorable to watch you squirm. Do you think I'm not being I'm not getting it, or?
I said adorable because it's sexist. That's why.
Okay.
No, I do think you're getting it. It's just like
it is remarkable,
great.
Though.
It is, and I think, and I meant adorable in a nice way. I really did, but meaning like your attempts to learn and understand are huge, and that's actually what I would suggest for anyone. When you have a good guy in your life who doesn't get it, don't yell at him. Don't pile on statistics. Sit down and listen to what they have to say. Understand their concern before you bite their head off. That's really tempting. I had a 2-hour bus ride with one of those such guys. Really nice dad, great husband. He was just trying to understand why a woman didn't report the sexual harassment until 10 years after it happened. And I kept giving him analogies and tried to help him understand. And eventually, at the end, he just kept saying, well, I wouldn't have done that. I feel like she did it to become famous, and, kind of blaming the victim. And the very end, I said to him, do you know anybody who's been assaulted? Do you know anyone who's sort of gone through? And he's kind of racking his brain. He's like, I really don't. Everyone I know is, these strong Swedish women. He doesn't know anyone. And I'm like, oh, you probably do. I don't know. Let's think about that. And his wife was in the other seat, and she leaned over and she said, how about your mom? And he went, oh, I forgot about that.
Fuck. Sorry.
And then, I know. And then he said, but this took 2 hours, guys, for us to get here. And this is a good man. And I said, your mom, tell me about that. And he describes how she was raped when she was 15 years old. And she's had 4 or 5 husbands since. His life has been completely affected by the pain she's been through, the insecurity she's always felt, and the damage that did. And it was worth all 2 hours, everybody, because at that moment, he got it. He's like, she never got help. She never told anyone. And it almost ruined her life and mine. And I said, yeah, maybe that's why she didn't tell anyone for 10 years. And now, #MeToo means someone's got my back. Someone will listen to me. I'm safe enough. So be nice to the good guys, because they don't know, but they need to hear the stories, but they also need to talk too. And it's really tempting to jump down their throat and say, what? Why don't you get this? Well, they'll get there.
And I think there is a difference too. There is a difference between someone who just doesn't know versus somebody that just doesn't want to know, and recognizing that difference as well. And that's for women and that's for men. There's some people that just think, oh, well, they deserved it, et cetera, or just like, hey, I don't understand, and are willing to listen. And I think a lot of men that do want to understand get lumped in with the other men that don't want to. And that's when it becomes sort of a taboo, or I don't even want to talk about it. I don't want to even think about it because I don't want to, I don't want someone jumping down my throat. So
I hesitate to say this, but I will agree. I play dumb on the show sometimes, but I think I can call myself a feminist. Hopefully my mom and wife and women who know me would agree. But it is sometimes a little bit harrowing. And I don't want to say, oh, look, I'm suffering. That's not the point. It's just, in reality, in practice, we have to all work together if we want to solve this. But it is a little bit harrowing sometimes to be in that seat of the person trying to listen and to help. And so even someone like me sometimes feel, whoa, okay, just wait a second. I'm not the enemy here, kind of, And it's something that men should work on, but not recognizing this on God, this is going to sound terrible, because
it's okay, just say it. It's okay.
I think it's the same issue for every problem of discrimination. The people in the group that is privileged will feel, and I think that's something that would come up if we ever talked about identity politics. The people in the group that is privileged will feel uneasy or some form of aggression or something that will make their natural reaction, well, then F all of this, right? It's not great, but it does happen. And if it even happens to me, and again, I'm playing dumb, it doesn't really happen to me, but if it does happen to someone in my position, which is someone who wants to help, wants to listen, wants to get people to talk to one another, I don't even know what the conclusion of that is. I guess I'm just trying to say it even happens to me. So I don't know what to do with that. I guess it's a question for myself. I don't know what to do with it.
Let me finish this on a happy note. After I did my women's story, which had nothing to do with my podcast, I just shoved it in both my podcast feeds and said, "You guys are all getting this, whether you like it or not. I'm going to throw this out there." 100% of the male reaction was, "Wow, I didn't know, and I feel terrible that you've gone through these things, and I'm going to think about that." 100% of the reaction from men and women. The women's ones broke my heart, but the men's gave me hope. So there, all the men are awesome.
I don't.
And I was going to throw in just one last thing with. You described it really well, Patrick, actually. It's when the person with privilege, and usually it's unacknowledged privilege, they don't recognize the privilege until they are, so it's pointed out. That's painful. No one wants to think they have some advantage. They want to believe they've earned everything. I've earned all of the things that I've gotten, and don't try to take that away from me. It's sort of a scarcity mentality a little bit. And so when you approach someone and try to tell someone in a position of privilege about your pain, it's really difficult. I mean, we don't have to get into this, but race relations in the United States is a long history of really loaded, very problematic. And a lot of it has to do with, it's very hard to hear the pain when maybe you didn't personally create the pain, but the legacy you come from created that pain. And so to hear it and to sit with someone's pain is really hard to do if you don't have a lot of training and time to do it. So your initial reaction will be defense. So if you find yourself defensive, and this is sort of anyone listening, if you find yourself defensive, maybe ask yourself, why can't I hear someone else's pain and not make it about me? Because that's what it is. I'm making that person's pain about me. It's a skill that comes with time and practice and intention and isn't easy to do, but it really is about hearing someone's pain fully and then going from there.
It's the first thing I thought of when you said you worked with the rape crisis group. Is like, oh God, how did you listen to all that pain? That was the first thought I had when you said that.
It's not easy, but someone's got to do it, because ultimately, and this is a final, women who have been traumatized need help. I think what we're seeing is that there's sort of a group cathartic process going on, but to hold these secrets in, to have them, it's like a weight that you're carrying around. To hold them in and to sort of move through the world in this much fear, there is help. There is a way to release a lot of that. And I think everyone's being triggered in some form right now, from the small little
things, everything going on,
big things. Yeah, absolutely. So, find a friend and get some help. And the last thing I want to say is just that I noticed this in this group of women, and Patrick, I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. We're sort of happy to hear each other.
Yeah, I'm loving this.
It's like, of course. Yeah, it's like, oh, you talk now you talk. And often in men, you've got an ego challenge where they sort of love to hear their voices sometimes. And so,
well, I'm not good at listening either, by the way. And I've just been riveted to the conversation. I realized, wow, it's just like I'm getting to listen to the podcast.
Yeah. So ladies, support each other. That's all.
As I interrupt you, by the way.
I forget that I could talk. I was like, oh, I can say things too, because I'm just listening to you all.
And I think I'll conclude it on this.
Nope, you told me you were going to throw to me too.
Oh, yes. Absolutely. Go ahead, Marlene.
Oh, my ADHD brain is being so quiet. I'm so proud of myself. Sorry, I just had to get that out of my system. Not sorry. I just had to get that out of my system. So there's two things. I'm really, Wendy, really thank you, and for saying that it's hard to hear somebody else's pain, especially when they, in the way they refer to it, as we've done here, as saying, men do this to me. That's a generalized term. So I can especially understand that if you say that, if you just sort of like get that off your chest when you're talking to a guy, I understand the defense reaction. So my question to men, but also to basically everybody who has a kind of privilege when you're talking to somebody who does not share that particular kind of privilege. That when you feel indeed that urge to sort of, well, that's not me, or maybe you didn't, maybe you interpreted wrongly. Maybe just when you feel that, just say to yourself, you know what? I just want to know what it's been like for you. So if you ask that, I think that's really valuable. Don't try to solve anything. Don't try to defend anything. Just ask and honestly be honest to yourself. Want to know what is this like for you? There's 2 articles I would really like to suggest. One of them, and I'll make sure you have the links, Patrick, so you can put them in the show notes. One of them is one that really helped me make my partner understand, and he then took the article to his job. He's a manager at a big IT consultants company, so that's a vast majority of male employees, which is a story, and if I remember it correctly, it's from The Guardian, which is about a woman explaining all those little things, all those paper cuts, coming from the idea that, she sort of lashed out at her partner, and he's like, I don't understand why this is such a big thing. And she's like, that's because I haven't been telling you all those little paper cuts all the time. And at the moment she did that, then the picture worked for him. He could understand why other things would cut so deep. So if you think to yourself, I know I'm not this guy, but I'm also not the guy who says he's not the guy, and so he does not need the consent clause. So read that article. That would be really helpful. Then, if you have a daughter, especially if you have a young daughter, but if it were up to me, also if you have a son or like a young son, there's an article about how to talk to your daughter about sex. And I would really, if I could have my wish, it would be that we all can normally converse about sex, honestly, because that would really solve a lot of things. And this article explains why it's so frustrating and difficult and freaking scary for most dads to talk to their daughters about sex, but also why it's incredibly important and most valuable. It actually explains you how to approach the subject, how to do this, how to talk about these things, and to make sure that you can help your kids have a healthy, a normal conversation about sex, so they know how to explain their boundaries, and also just how to understand their own bodies, which is really, really valuable. And to end on a lighter note, I will also add the link for a video of the sort of the Dutch version of Last Week Tonight with John Oliver. We have a similar sort of on Sunday political or societal commentary show with a Dutch man. And one of the ideas is that one of the problems that we have not addressed, and actually it hasn't come up in this show too, is that there is a sort of unspoken feeling that somehow women are, it's up to women to relieve sexual tension of guys, of men, in relations to, and when they're in a relationship too, that there's an urge and it needs to be served. Actually, there's a really healthy and really good remedy for that does not involve sort of pushing yourself on somebody else, which is really healthy masturbation. And our Dutch dude actually made, like the TV guy actually made a musical song about that. It's called the Masturbation Song, which explains why it's actually really healthy relief. And it also includes make sure you're alone.
Not on the subway.
Yes,
Yes, please.
actually, personally, I think it's really interesting. It will make you laugh. It also makes sure that you will never forget the lesson.
All right. Well, send me all the links, and I'll make sure to include them in the show notes. So you kind of said what I wanted to say, which is ultimately listening is what this show is about, and I think the solution, which Alison mentioned in the beginning that we were going to come up with, by the end. Maybe that is what we can do. Just
I want to thank you, Patrick.
Right?
Thank you for doing this, and it's very much to me like the shows I've listened to, learning about Venezuela and Colombia and Ireland and Saudi Arabia, and I've learned so much from this, and I hope this helped other people to understand the stuff we're talking about. But I enjoyed the heck out of this. This was wonderful.
Well, so did I.
I really hope it did help a little bit, people listening. And if it didn't, then listen more. Listen to the people who say they have problems and ask questions and be interested. And not like I did earlier in the show, don't make it about yourself. Like, it's not about what necessarily we can do immediately. Maybe listening is the right first step. All right, why don't we go around the virtual table and let us know if you have some kind of presence on the internet and if people want to talk to you, ask questions, or just find out what you're up to. Let us know where they can find you. Maybe Wendy, are you still on Instagram?
I am. You can find me on Instagram, and you can find me at therapythursdays.com. You can email me there, and I have been very lax about writing on that blog, but it'll be updated fairly soon, so no judges.
Cool. Alison?
My Twitter handle is podfeet, PODFEET, and my website is podfeet.com, and my email is allison@podfeet.com. And I'd love to hear from people what they thought, and especially if you have more questions. If there's things you want to know, what did you mean when you said, or even arguing with me? I love to argue, so go for it.
And let me say, I don't love to argue, but I would love to refer you to some therapeutic intervention if you're interested in that. So argue with Alison. If you need help, contact me.
Get actual help from Wendy.
And you can find that show we mentioned on the two podcasts that Alison does, where she tells her woman's story. So you can find that as well. I'll include, as usual, the Twitter handles of everyone in the show notes, and you can go from there. Shannon, what about yourself?
I am at ShayX5 on Twitter. On Instagram, I think it's Shay1220 on Twitter. I also have a podcast called The Showmance Club, where we do show podcasts about shows like Big Brother and RuPaul's Drag Race, if you want to check that out. And it's just very nonsensical. It's me and two friends, and we have fun. Also, what else am I involved in? I'm a GM as well, so I do that. But that's pretty much it. I produce something called Brassy on YouTube. I also produce another show called Seasoned. It's an Instagram television show, so with some amazing people and some amazing girls that write and create. So check me out. I repost a lot of stuff on Instagram. I tweet a lot of stuff as well, and that's how me and Marlene met. So I'm pretty cool. Come check me out.
Excellent.
Yep, she's really cool. Can confirm.
Marlene, you're cool too. Where can people find you?
I'm on Twitter at Monxies, which is MONXIES. I think I find the English phonetic alphabet really difficult. But you'll find me. It will be in the show notes too. And I am not really looking forward to argue, but I would. But honestly, I mean this sincerely. If you're if you're a person who says, I'm trying. I just don't understand. I'm really okay if you send me a tweet and say, hey, so I don't understand why this apparently hurts so much, and I do want to understand why. Then we can talk about that. That's okay.
Cool. So again, the Twitter handles will be in the show notes. You can also come and ask questions and talk about all of this on the blog itself. That's frenchspin.com. There will be, of course, an article for this episode, along with all the links that people discussed on the show. And on Twitter, you can find me as Not Patrick. You can also find me on Facebook as Not Patrick. You can leave comments on iTunes. That's always helpful. If you want to leave a review and a few stars, that would be very nice and help us gain a little bit of visibility. And of course, if you actually want to financially support the show, that's also possible. You can do that at patreon.com/the Phileas Club. The link is going to be in the show notes too. It takes 2 seconds. You decide how much you want to give per episode, and then your credit card or payment method will be charged at the end of the month. You can choose how many episodes you want to support a month. You can stop whenever you want. Everyone knows Patreon. It's really cool, and it helps creators like myself continue to produce shows like this. So if you appreciate it, if you think it's useful, valuable in any way, please consider going to patreon.com/the Phileas Club. And thanks a million to all the people who already do. That is going to be it for me. Do let us know what you thought of the episode, and we will be back with a regular episode in about a couple of weeks. We'll talk to you then. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye-bye.